The wire bit into Faith Owens's palms even through her worn leather gloves, but she kept twisting, kept working, because stopping meant acknowledging the cold that had seeped into her bones over the past 3 hours. February in Northern California was unforgiving, especially in the mountains surrounding Downeyville, where the snow still clung to the ground in stubborn patches, and the wind cut through even the thickest coat. She had been out here since dawn, mending the fence line that separated her modest property from the open range, and the work seemed endless. Every post she secured revealed another section sagging or broken, as if the winter had conspired to destroy everything she had left. Her husband had been dead for 8 months now. Thomas had caught pneumonia last June, a cruel twist of fate in the middle of summer, and within a week he was gone. At 24 years old, Faith had found herself a widow with a small ranch, 3 horses, a dozen cattle, and more debt than she cared to calculate. The other ranchers had offered their condolences, their casseroles, their promises to help if she needed anything. But as the months wore on, those promises faded like morning mist, and Faith learned what her grandmother had always told her. In this life, you could only truly count on yourself. She stepped back to examine her work on the current post. The wire was taut now, properly secured, but her hands ached and her fingers had gone numb despite the gloves. She flexed them, trying to restore circulation, and looked down the fence line. At least another 100 yards needed attention before she could even think about heading back to the house. The sun was already past its peak, which meant she had maybe 4 more hours of decent light. 4 hours to finish what should have been a 2-day job with proper help. You are going to tear those hands to shreds if you keep working like that. Faith spun around, her hand instinctively moving to the rifle she had propped against the fence post 15 feet away. A man sat astride a roan horse not 20 yards from where she stood, and she cursed herself for being so absorbed in her work that she had not heard his approach. He wore a dark coat dusted with trail dirt, a hat pulled low enough to shadow his eyes, and he sat easy in the saddle like a man who had spent more of his life on horseback than on foot. "This is private property," Faith said, her voice steadier than she felt. She did not reach for the rifle, not yet, but she shifted her weight in a way that would let her move quickly if needed. The man raised his hands slowly, palms out. "I mean no harm, madam. Just passing through and saw you working out here alone. Thought you might could use some help." "I did not ask for help." "No, madam, you did not." He lowered his hands to rest on his saddle horn. "Name is Cooper James. I am looking for work, and it seems like you have got work that needs doing." Faith studied him more carefully now. He looked to be in his late 20s, with several days' worth of dark stubble on his jaw and eyes that were a startling blue even in the shadows of his hat. There was something weathered about him, a hardness that came from years of rough living, but his voice was polite and his posture unthreatening. "I cannot afford to hire anyone," she said bluntly. "I can barely afford to feed myself through the winter." Cooper James nodded as if he had expected this answer. "What if I work for food and a place to sleep? Your barn looks sturdy enough, and I am not particular about accommodations. I am handy with fence work, good with horses, and I can handle cattle if you need that too." "Why would you work for just food and shelter? That makes no sense," he shrugged. "Maybe I am tired of drifting. Maybe I like the look of this valley. Maybe I just do not like seeing a woman work herself to exhaustion on a job that is too big for one person." He paused. "Or maybe I am running from something and figure a quiet ranch in the mountains is a good place to lay low for a while. Take your pick of reasons, madam. The offer stands either way." Faith wanted to refuse. Every instinct told her not to trust a stranger, especially one who admitted he might be running from trouble. But her hands hurt, her back hurt, and the fence line stretched out before her like an accusation. She thought about the coming spring, about calving season and planting and all the 100 tasks that would need doing. She thought about doing it all alone again until something broke. Maybe the fence, maybe the ranch, maybe herself. 1 week, she heard herself say. You can work for a week. Food and shelter in the barn, like you said. After that, we will see. Cooper James smiled, and it transformed his face completely, chasing away some of that hardness. Yes, madam, I will take good care of my horse and be right back to help you finish this fence. He rode toward the barn, and Faith watched him go, wondering if she had just made a terrible mistake or the first smart decision since Thomas died. She picked up her tools and got back to work, refusing to dwell on it. Time would tell, the way it always did. True to his word, Cooper returned within 20 minutes, on foot this time, carrying his own set of tools. He did not say much, just looked at the fence, nodded, and started working on the next damaged section. Faith watched him out of the corner of her eye, ready to correct him if he did the work wrong, but his hands moved with practiced efficiency. He knew what he was doing. They worked in silence for the better part of an hour. The sun continued its descent, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and the temperature dropped another few degrees. Faith's breath plumed in the air each time she exhaled. Beside her, Cooper worked steadily, his movements economical and sure. There was something almost meditative about working alongside someone else, even a stranger. It reminded her of the early days with Thomas, before the ranch had started failing, when they would work side by side and dream about the future. How long have you been on your own out here? Cooper asked, breaking the silence. Faith considered not answering, but there seemed little point in secrecy. Anyone in Downeyville could tell him her story. My husband died 8 months ago, pneumonia. I am sorry. So is everyone. She did not mean for it to sound bitter, but it did. She twisted a length of wire a bit more forcefully than necessary. Cooper glanced at her but did not comment on her tone. Family. My parents are back in Illinois. They wanted me to come home after Thomas died, sell the ranch and forget about California. But this is my home now. I am not giving it up. Stubborn, Cooper said, but there was something like approval in his voice. Practical, Faith corrected. This land is all I have. If I sell it now, I will get pennies on the dollar because everyone knows I am desperate. If I can hold on until spring, get the cattle to market, maybe I can turn things around. That is a lot of maybes. It is all I have got. They fell back into silence, but it felt more comfortable now, less weighted. By the time the sun touched the horizon, they had finished nearly twice as much fence as Faith would have managed alone. Her body ached, but it was the good kind of ache that came from productive work. Cooper gathered his tools without being asked, and Faith did the same. There is a pump by the barn, she said. You can wash up there. I will bring supper out in about an hour. You do not have to do that, madam. I can manage. We agreed on food and shelter. I keep my word. She started walking toward the house, then paused and looked back. And stop calling me madam. My name is Faith. Faith Owens. Faith, he repeated as if testing how it sounded. All right then, Faith, and you can call me Coop. Cooper is what my mother called me when she was angry. Despite herself, Faith felt her lips twitch toward a smile. She caught herself and turned away before he could see. She was not ready to smile yet, was not ready for anything that felt like moving forward. But as she walked to the house, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It took her several minutes to identify it as hope. The house was cold when she entered. The fire in the stove burned down to embers. Faith added wood and got the flames going again, then set about preparing supper. She had venison stew left from yesterday, which she could warm up, and she made fresh biscuits because that was only polite. While the food heated, She found herself wondering about Cooper James, about where he had come from, what he might be running from, and why he had really stopped to help her. She ladled stew into 2 bowls and wrapped the biscuits in a cloth, then carried everything out to the barn on a wooden tray. The temperature had dropped dramatically with the sunset, and she could see her breath in great clouds. The barn door was ajar, lamplight spilling out into the gathering darkness. "Coop," she called before entering. "I've got supper. Come on in." She pushed through the door and found he had made himself a neat little camp in one of the empty stalls. He had spread his bedroll over fresh straw, hung his saddlebags on a nail, and positioned a wooden crate to serve as a small table. He had washed, she noticed, his face clean and his hair damp and pushed back from his forehead. "I brought enough for both of us," Faith said, setting the tray on the crate. "Figured we could eat out here. The house is cold anyway." If he was surprised by this, he did not show it. He just gestured to his bedroll. "Have a seat. Not much in the way of furniture, but it is clean." They sat and ate in companionable silence. The stew was good, rich and filling, and the biscuits were still warm. Faith found herself actually tasting the food, something she had not done in weeks. Usually she ate because she had to, barely noticing what she put in her mouth. But sitting here in the lamplight with another person, she felt almost human again. "This is good," Coop said, sopping up gravy with his biscuit. "Real good, thank you. It is just stew." "It is more than that. It is hospitality. There is a difference." Faith looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. His eyes were kind despite the hardness around them. There was a scar on his left cheekbone, pale against his tanned skin, and his hands were calloused and scarred from years of work. These were not the hands of a man afraid of hard labor. "Where are you from?" she asked. "Texas originally, but I have not been back there in near 10 years. I have drifted mostly. Wyoming, Colorado, Nevada, now California. I go where the work is." "That sounds lonely." He considered this. "I suppose it is. But lonely is safe. You cannot lose what you do not have." Faith understood that sentiment all too well. She had thought she was safe with Thomas, thought they would build a life together. And then he was gone, and the pain of that loss had nearly destroyed her. Sometimes she wished she had never loved him at all, just to avoid the agony of losing him. "What are you running from?" she asked quietly. Coop met her eyes. "What makes you think I am running? You said it yourself earlier. And nobody works for just food and shelter unless they have got a reason to stay hidden." He was silent for a long moment, and Faith thought he might not answer. Then he sighed. "I killed a man in Nevada, Silver Creek, about 3 months back." Faith's hand stilled on her spoon. "Did he deserve it?" "Yes. He was beating a woman in the street, and when I told him to stop, he drew on me. I was faster." Coop's voice was flat, matter of fact. "The law called it self-defense, but the man I killed was the brother of the town's biggest rancher. He put a price on my head, unofficial-like. So I moved on, and you have been moving ever since. Until now." He looked at her directly. "I am tired of running, Faith. I am tired of waking up in a different town every week, tired of never having anything to call my own. When I saw you out there working alone, saw this place, something just felt right. I know that probably sounds foolish." "No," Faith said softly. "It does not sound foolish at all." They finished their meal in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. The kind shared between 2 people who had revealed something true about themselves and found no judgment in return. When Faith gathered the empty bowls and stood to leave, Coop stood with her. "Thank you again for the meal," he said. "I will earn my keep, I promise you that." "I believe you," Faith said, and realized she meant it. "We start at dawn. Fences do not mend themselves." She walked back to the house through the cold night air, and for the first time in 8 months she did not feel completely alone. It was a dangerous feeling, she knew. She barely knew this man, and trusting too quickly could lead to disaster. But as she banked the fire and climbed into her cold bed, she could not quite bring herself to regret offering him that week of work. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Faith and Coop would rise with the dawn, share a quick breakfast of coffee and whatever she had made, then head out to work. The fence line took 3 more days to complete, and by the end of it, Faith's hands were rough and sore, but the property was secure. After the fences, there were a dozen other tasks waiting. The barn roof needed patching, several stalls needed mucking and repair, and the tack room was a disaster of tangled leather and rusted metal. Coop worked tirelessly, never complaining, never shirking. Faith found herself working alongside him more often than not, and as they worked, they talked. Small things at first: the weather, the horses, the best way to repair a fence post. But gradually, the conversations deepened. Coop told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about his father who had died when Coop was 16, about his mother who had remarried a man Coop could not abide. Faith told him about meeting Thomas at a church social in Illinois, about their decision to head west and try their luck in California, about the early years when everything seemed possible. "Did you love him?" Coop asked one afternoon. They were in the barn, mending tack, and the question caught Faith off guard. "Thomas, yes, I loved him," she paused, considering, "but I am not sure I was in love with him, if that makes sense. We were partners, friends. We cared for each other and we worked well together. But that spark that people talk about, that passion, I do not know if we ever had that." "No shame in a practical marriage," Coop said. "Lots of people build good lives on less. Maybe. But sometimes I wonder what it would be like to feel that kind of love. The kind that makes you foolish and reckless. The kind worth writing songs about." She laughed a little. "Listen to me. 24 years old and talking like a dried-up old spinster. You are not old, and you are certainly not dried up." Coop's voice was quiet, and when Faith looked up, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You are a strong, beautiful woman who has been through hell and came out the other side. There is nothing dried up about that." Faith felt heat rise to her cheeks. She looked back down at the bridle she was mending, suddenly very focused on the leather in her hands. "You should not say things like that." "Why not? It is true." "Because it is not proper, because you work for me, because I am a widow and people will talk." "People always talk," Coop said. "And I do not work for you. We have a partnership, remember? Food and shelter in exchange for labor. That makes us equals." Faith wanted to argue, but she could not find the words. The truth was, she liked hearing Coop say she was beautiful. She liked the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention. She liked having him here, liked the sound of another person moving around the ranch, liked not being alone with her grief and her fears. But liking something did not make it safe. Liking something did not mean it would not destroy you in the end. "The week is up tomorrow," she said instead of responding to his comment. "You have more than earned your keep. If you want to stay on, I would be glad to have you. Same arrangement." Coop set down the saddle he had been working on. "I would like to stay if you will have me." "Then it is settled." Faith stood, hanging the mended bridle on its hook. "I need to start supper. I will call you when it is ready." She fled to the house, her heart pounding harder than it should. This was foolish, she told herself. She was being foolish. Coop was a drifter, a man running from trouble, and she was a widow barely holding onto her ranch. There was no future in whatever she was starting to feel. There could not be. But that night, when she brought supper to the barn, she found Coop had cleaned up the tack room completely. Every piece of leather was oiled and hung properly, every bit of metal was polished, and he had even swept the floor. It was such a small thing, but it hit her hard. Thomas had always meant to organize the tack room, had promised every week that he would get to it. But he never had. And here was Coop, who owed her nothing, who had been here barely a week, taking care of things without being asked. "You did not have to do all this," Faith said, looking around the transformed space. "I wanted to. Besides, I cannot stand a messy tack room. Drives me to distraction." He grinned. "My mother used to say I was particular that way." Faith smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "She sounds like a wise woman." She had her moments. They ate together that night, and Faith found herself lingering afterward, talking about nothing important and everything at once. She told him about her dreams of building up the ranch, of maybe breeding horses someday. He told her about a ranch he had worked in Wyoming, about the beautiful country up there but the brutal winters. They talked until the lamp burned low, and Faith realized with a start that hours had passed. "I should go," she said reluctantly. "Morning comes early. It always does." Coop walked her to the barn door. The night was clear and cold, the stars brilliant overhead. "Faith, thank you for trusting me, for giving me a chance when you had no reason to." "You have earned that trust," Faith said. "Every day you have been here, you have earned it." They stood there in the doorway, close enough that Faith could feel the warmth radiating from him. For a wild moment she thought he might kiss her, and her heart raced at the possibility. But Coop just smiled, tipped his hat, and stepped back into the barn. "Good night, Faith." "Good night, Coop." She walked to the house in a daze, her mind spinning. She was falling for him. It was reckless and foolish and far too fast, but there was no denying it anymore. The question was what to do about it. The answer came 3 days later, during a trip into Downeyville for supplies. Faith usually avoided town as much as possible, hating the pitying looks and whispered conversations that followed her. But they needed flour and salt and a few other essentials, so she hitched up the wagon and made the journey. Coop offered to come with her, but she declined. She needed time alone to think, to clear her head. The general store was busy when she arrived, full of ranchers and miners stocking up before the next storm. Faith gathered her supplies quickly, trying to avoid conversation, but Mrs. Brennan cornered her by the dry goods. "Faith, dear, how are you managing? We have all been so worried about you out there all alone." Mrs. Brennan was a well-meaning busybody who had made it her mission to know everyone's business. "I am managing fine, thank you. But surely it is too much for one woman. Have you thought about selling? I am sure someone would take the property off your hands." "I am not selling." "But dear, be reasonable. You cannot possibly maintain that ranch by yourself. It is not proper for a young woman to be living alone like that. People are starting to talk." Faith felt her temper flare. "Let them talk. I am not interested in what people think." "Well," Mrs. Brennan sniffed, clearly offended, "I am only trying to help, but if you want to be stubborn about it, I suppose that is your business." Faith paid for her supplies and loaded them into the wagon, her hands shaking with anger. People had been telling her what she could not do, what was not proper, what was not possible since Thomas died. She was tired of it. Tired of being treated like a helpless child who could not make her own decisions. She was halfway home when she saw the smoke. It rose in a dark column from the direction of her ranch, thick and ominous against the pale sky. Faith's heart lurched into her throat. She snapped the reins, urging the horses faster, her mind racing through terrible possibilities. The house. The barn. Coop. The wagon clattered up the road, supplies bouncing in the back, and as she rounded the final bend, she could see the source of the smoke. Not the house, thank God, and not the barn. It was a brush fire on the eastern edge of her property, probably started by a careless spark from someone passing through. But it was spreading fast in the dry winter grass, heading straight for her grazing land. She saw Coop immediately on horseback, trying to beat back the flames with a blanket. He had already cleared a fire break. She could see the dark scar of turned earth, but the fire was moving too fast. If it jumped the break, everything would burn. Faith abandoned the wagon and ran, grabbing a shovel from the barn on her way. She joined Coop at the fire break, digging frantically, widening the gap. The heat was intense, the smoke choking, and her eyes streamed with tears. But she kept digging, kept working, and beside her Coop did the same. "Get the other side," he shouted over the roar of the flames. "We can contain it if we work fast." Faith ran around to the far side of the fire, using her shovel to smother small flames before they could spread. The work was exhausting, every muscle screaming, her lungs burning from the smoke. But slowly, inch by inch, they gained ground. The firebreak held. The flames found nothing to feed on and began to die. It took 2 hours of brutal work, but finally the fire was out, reduced to smoldering ash and blackened earth. Faith collapsed to her knees, coughing, her face streaked with soot and sweat. Coop knelt beside her, equally filthy, his chest heaving. "You all right?" he gasped. "I think so. You? Been better, been worse." He looked at the blackened ground, at the firebreak that had saved the ranch. "That was close, too close." Faith started to laugh, a slightly hysterical sound. "I leave for 3 hours, 3 hours, and the place nearly burns down." Coop laughed too, and suddenly they were both laughing, great whooping gales of laughter that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with relief. They had saved the ranch. Together, they had saved it. Faith's laughter turned to tears without warning. All the stress of the past months, all the fear and loneliness and exhaustion, came pouring out. She sobbed into her hands, her shoulders shaking, and she did not protest when Coop pulled her into his arms. She cried against his chest while he held her, one hand stroking her smoke-tangled hair, murmuring reassurances. "It is all right. You are all right. We are all right." "I am so tired," Faith whispered. "I am so tired of fighting alone." "You are not alone," Coop said firmly. "Not anymore." "I am here, Faith. I am not going anywhere." She pulled back to look at him, to search his face for the truth of that statement. What she saw there made her breath catch. He looked at her with such tenderness, such clear affection, that she could not doubt his sincerity. "I am falling in love with you," she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. "I know it is too soon, I know it is foolish, but I cannot help it." Coop cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "Then I guess we are both fools. Because I have been in love with you since the day I saw you out there mending fences alone. You were so determined, so fierce. I took one look at you and thought, that is a woman worth staying for. You mean it, every word." He kissed her then, soft and gentle despite the ash and smoke that covered them both. Faith kissed him back, pouring 8 months of loneliness and grief and fear into that kiss, and finding hope and joy and possibility on the other side. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. "We should get cleaned up," Faith said, though she made no move to leave his arms. "We are a mess." "We are," Coop grinned. "But we are a mess together. That has got to count for something." They walked back to the barn together, hands clasped, and for the first time since Thomas died, Faith felt like she might actually make it through this. She might not just survive, but truly live again. And all because a stranger had stopped to help her mend a fence. The weeks that followed were the happiest Faith could remember. She and Coop worked the ranch together, preparing for spring, and in the evenings they would sit together and talk for hours. Sometimes he would stay in the barn, propriety requiring at least the appearance of separation. But more often than not he would linger in the house until the fire burned low and Faith had to force herself to send him away. They kept their growing relationship quiet, aware of how the town would react to a widow courting so soon after her husband's death. But keeping it quiet did not make it any less real. Coop courted her the old-fashioned way, bringing her wildflowers when he found them on the property, fixing things around the house without being asked, making her laugh when the work got too heavy. And Faith, for her part, found herself opening up in ways she never had with Thomas. She told Coop her fears, her dreams, her most secret thoughts, and he listened to all of it without judgment. One evening in early March, as they sat by the fire after supper, Coop reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Faith's heart began to race. "I know it has only been 6 weeks," Coop said, his voice nervous in a way she had never heard before. "And I know people will say it is too soon. But I also know that life is short and uncertain, and when you find something real, something true, you should hold on to it." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band. "This was my grandmother's ring. It is not fancy, but it is all I have. Faith Owens, will you marry me?" Faith stared at the ring, her throat tight with emotion. 6 weeks ago, she had been alone and despairing, barely holding on. Now here was this man, this good, kind, hard-working man, offering her a future, offering her love. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Coop's face split into a grin so wide it looked like it might crack. He slipped the ring on her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he kissed her, deep and passionate, and Faith melted into him, into the promise of what they could build together. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Downeyville. A few people attended, mostly out of curiosity, and Faith could see the scandal in their eyes. But she did not care. Let them talk. Let them judge. She had found love, real love, and she was not going to apologize for it. The circuit preacher performed the ceremony, his voice solemn as he spoke the words that bound Faith and Coop together. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Coop kissed her in front of everyone, a declaration that she was his and he was hers, and to hell with what anyone thought. They spent their wedding night in the house that now belonged to both of them, and for the first time, Faith understood what she had been missing with Thomas. This was the passion she had wondered about, the connection that made people write songs and poems. In Coop's arms, she felt complete in a way she never had before. The spring brought new challenges. The cattle needed moving to better pasture, and several calves were born, including one difficult birth that had Faith and Coop working through the night to save both mother and baby. But they faced each challenge together, and somehow that made even the hardest work bearable. In May, a man rode up to the ranch. Faith was in the garden planting vegetables when she heard the horse, and she straightened, shading her eyes to see the stranger. He was well-dressed, with a marshal's badge on his chest, and Faith's stomach clenched with fear. "I am looking for Cooper James," the marshal said without preamble. "What for?" Faith asked, stepping between the marshal and the house where Coop was fixing a window. "There is a matter needs settling." "Is he here?" Coop emerged from the house, wiping his hands on a rag. "I am Cooper James." "What is this about, Marshal?" The marshal studied him for a long moment. "You killed a man in Silver Creek, Nevada, Jeb Thornton. His brother put a price on your head." "The law ruled it self-defense," Coop said calmly, though Faith could see the tension in his shoulders. "I have got the paperwork to prove it." "I know you do, I checked. That is why I am here." The marshal pulled out a folded document. "Jeb Thornton's brother died 3 weeks ago. Thrown from a horse, broke his neck. With him gone, there is nobody pushing for revenge. The bounty has been withdrawn. You are a free man, Mr. James. I thought you would want to know." The relief that flooded through Faith was so intense she felt lightheaded. Coop took the document, read it carefully, then looked up at the marshal with wonder on his face. "I am free," free and clear. You can stop running now. The marshal tipped his hat. Good day to you both. He rode away, leaving Faith and Coop staring at each other in the yard. Then Coop let out a whoop of joy and grabbed Faith, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. I am free, he said, setting her down but not letting go. I can stay. Really stay, not just hiding. We can build a real life here. We already were building a real life, Faith said, but she was grinning just as wide as he was. That summer was glorious. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts. They sold the cattle at a good price and used the money to pay off Faith's debts and buy more stock. Coop proved to have a gift for training horses, and word spread. Soon people were bringing their difficult mounts to him, paying good money for his services. By autumn, the ranch was not just surviving but prospering. Faith stood on the porch one October evening, watching Coop work with a young stallion in the corral. He moved with such confidence, such skill, gentling the horse with patience and firmness. She rested her hand on her stomach, feeling the small swell there that had only just begun to show. She had not told him yet. She wanted to be sure, wanted to wait until she could not deny it anymore. But as she watched him, imagining him teaching their child to ride, to work the land, to be good and kind and strong, she felt a surge of love so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. Coop finished with the horse and walked toward the house, and the smile he gave her when he saw her waiting was everything. This was what love was supposed to be. Not just partnership, not just companionship, but this fierce joy at seeing each other, this sense of coming home. You look happy, he said, climbing the porch steps and pulling her into his arms. I am happy. Happier than I ever thought I would be again. Me too. He kissed her forehead. Thank you for giving me a chance that day, for letting a stranger help you mend your fence. You did more than mend my fence, Faith said softly. You mended my broken heart. Coop pulled back to look at her, his blue eyes searching hers. You mended mine too. I did not even know it was broken until you made it whole again. Faith decided then to tell him. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach, watching his face as understanding dawned. Are you saying what I think you are saying? He asked, his voice hushed with wonder. We are going to have a baby. In the spring. Coop's eyes filled with tears and he dropped to his knees, pressing his face against her stomach. A baby. We are going to have a baby. Faith ran her fingers through his dark hair, her own tears falling freely. Are you happy? Happy does not even begin to cover it. He stood, cupping her face in his hands. I love you, Faith. I love you more than I have ever loved anything. I love you too. That winter was mild, and they spent the dark evenings preparing for the baby. Coop built a beautiful cradle from pine, carving it with intricate designs of horses and mountains. Faith sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full with anticipation. They argued good-naturedly about names, about whether the baby would have her dark hair or his blue eyes, about who would teach the child to ride and who would teach them to read. In April, as the valley burst into bloom, Faith went into labor. It was a long, difficult birth, and there were moments when Coop thought he might lose her, might lose everything he had found in this beautiful, stubborn woman. But Faith was strong, stronger than anyone he had ever known, and when the midwife finally placed a squalling, red-faced baby boy in his arms, Coop wept with relief and joy. He is perfect, Faith whispered, exhausted but radiant. Let me see him. Coop placed their son in her arms, and they marveled together at this tiny life they had created. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes, they were the deep blue of his father's. What should we name him? Coop asked. I was thinking about Thomas, Faith said slowly. To honor my first husband, he would have loved this ranch, loved seeing it prosper. It seems right to give his name to our son. Coop hesitated, then nodded. Thomas Cooper James. It has a good sound to it. Thomas Cooper James, Faith repeated, smiling down at the baby. Welcome to the world, little one. Welcome home. The years that followed were full and rich. Thomas grew into a sturdy, adventurous boy who loved horses as much as his father did. When he was 3, Faith gave birth to twin girls, Sarah and Emma, who were as different as night and day but equally adored. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming known throughout the county for the quality of its horses and cattle. Faith and Coop grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had their disagreements, their struggles, but they always worked through them together, the way they had worked together to mend that fence on a cold February day so long ago. And whenever times got hard, whenever Faith felt overwhelmed, Coop would remind her that she was not alone, that they were a team, that together they could handle anything. On their 10th anniversary, they stood together on the porch, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was teaching his sisters to rope a practice post, and their laughter rang out clear and bright in the spring air. "You ever regret it?" Faith asked. "Stopping here that day, giving up your freedom to work for food and shelter?" Coop pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Not for a single second. That day I saw you out there mending fences alone in the cold, looking so fierce and determined. That was the day my life really started. Everything before was just wandering, but here with you I found my home." "I found mine too," Faith said. "I thought I lost everything when Thomas died, but really, I think I had to lose that life to find this one, to find you." "We found each other," Coop corrected, "and I plan to spend the rest of my life being grateful for it." They stood together in the fading light, surrounded by the life they had built together. The ranch stretched out before them, prosperous and beautiful, a testament to hard work and love. In the distance, the mountains stood eternal, watching over the valley as they always had. Faith thought back to that cold February day, to the moment when she had looked up and seen a stranger offering help. She had been so broken then, so lost, but Coop had seen past her grief to the strength beneath. He had helped her finish the fences, and in doing so, he had mended the broken places in her heart. Life was uncertain. Faith knew that better than most, but she also knew that love, real love, could sustain you through the hardest times. It could give you the strength to keep going when everything seemed impossible, and if you were very lucky, it could heal even the deepest wounds. "Come on," Coop said, taking her hand. "Let us go teach these children of ours how to actually throw a rope. Thomas is doing it all wrong." Faith laughed and let him pull her off the porch. As they walked toward their children, hands clasped, she felt a profound sense of contentment. This was her life now, not the life she had planned, but something better. Something earned through heartbreak and hard work, and the courage to take a chance on a stranger. The sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and in the gathering twilight, the James family worked and played together. Faith watched Coop patiently correct Thomas's grip on the rope, saw him scoop up Emma when she stumbled, listened to him praise Sarah's attempt. This man, who had been running from his past when he found her, had become the foundation of her future. And when he looked up and caught her watching, when he smiled that smile that still made her heart race after all these years, Faith smiled back. She had been mending fences alone in the cold, broken and barely holding on. But Coop had finished the job, and in doing so, he had fixed her broken heart. They had built a good life together. A real life. And as she watched her children laugh and her husband teach them the skills they would need to carry on this ranch someday, Faith knew that the best decision she had ever made was saying yes to a stranger's offer of help on a cold winter day. The ranch would continue to thrive. The children would grow and have children of their own, And through it all, the love between Faith and Coop would remain, a foundation strong enough to build generations upon. Because that was what real love did. It endured. It sustained. It mended what was broken and made it stronger than before. As darkness fell and they herded the children inside for supper, Faith looked back at the fence line in the distance. The post stood straight and true, the wire taut and strong, just as it had been since that day Coop had helped her finish the work. It was a small thing, really, mending a fence. But sometimes the smallest acts of kindness led to the biggest changes in your life. Faith closed the door behind her family and followed them into the warm, lamp-lit house. Outside, the wind whispered through the valley, carrying the promise of spring and renewal. Inside, there was love and laughter and the simple joy of being together. And for Faith Owens James, that was more than enough. It was everything.